Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, I am SocioPsycho and this is Mob Reviews, and today I bring you Tenshu General. It is a RTS, a very simplistic one, but still nonetheless an RTS. How well does it actually handle? And that's what we'll dive into. Now, an RTS is a real-time strategy game, if you were not aware of that, and this is created by Smart Art Games, available for PC, Mac, and Linux. Now we'll begin in the options menu. In the options you do have a wide berth of screen resolution, so I do appreciate that. You have sound on or off as well as music. I would have liked to see it on sliders, and they do not have music propelling through the game. They have a Japanese sense, as this takes part in, not exactly sure the time frame, but a feudal Japan, and having the music arcing throughout the story or the gameplay would have definitely been a huge boon to the game, because while you can easily just add your own music, it's one thing that doesn't really help now propel the atmosphere, at least the tension that could have been there. Is it a huge deal? No, but it is something to note. Now, the game has been running at 40 frames per second, and you may think, oh, 40 frames per second, but the graphic quality of the game is very simplistic, and that doesn't actually deteriorate from the game because they match up the mechanics with the game to the limitations graphically they went for, and while they may not be amazing, they're perfectly fine for the task suited at hand. Now, I will state that the game in its performance area, there has been no clipping or tearing. I've had a few crashes here and there, but why I do not feel the need to demonize this game for that is because the progress I lost was very small, and the developers of this game are very active in trying to fix and maintain and make better the product, so they're already on top of it in the Steam pages and in my personal talks with the developers, that they care about their game, they care about their project, and they want to make it improve and want to make it better. And so for that, my hat's off, and the few crashes I had were, yes, of course they took me out of the experience, but they weren't anything detrimental, so let that not impede you, but as a reviewer I have to state that. So when we jump in here, what do we have to show you, ladies and gentlemen? And well, the gameplay. As I said, the game itself is very simplistic. As you start off, you have 4 different campaigns. When we jump back a bit, we'll show that you have your skirmish mode, which is definitely appreciated to see in any RTS. You have a wide berth of different sort of maps that you can play on, and the casual, normal, or fast, meaning basically just a difficulty rating, as we'll get into more of the difficulty a little bit more. But when it comes to the options you have available to experience the game, there's a fair bit of content. So for your money's worth, you're actually going to get value if you enjoy the game. When it comes to the campaigns, there are 4 campaigns in order that you progress through, and while the different characteristics don't have their own story and it's not really an arc, there's a baseline so you know what's going on, but it's not really a pivotal role of the game. You will understand that yes, we are in Japan, yes, we are fighting in this time, and it's a test to be the best general that one can be. But beyond that, when you play through the first campaign, it gives the layout and helps you understand how to play the game. And then the other campaigns sort of play off the other perspectives that you were competing against as the first campaign. So it's not an abundance of maps and a bunch of different storylines or anything else like that in the campaign, but it is an interesting perspective, and one that's not done in a bad way. I didn't feel cheapened by it not having a huge berth of different campaigns sprawling out in some fashion. Now, as you'll notice, the mission that we're on is just one part of the continent. And many of the maps are like this, and they are like this due to the way the combat system works, because the game is a RTS fashion in a fast-paced click and resource management with some harass. Larger the maps, the more difficult it is going to be able to manage resources based on what the limitations of the game offers. So understanding that they're not going to have huge sprawling empires and armies upon armies, they just downscaled what they did have, and I'm perfectly fine with that, because instead of trying to overreach, they kept right within their goal, and it made the experience that much more pleasurable. I feel strongly if they went and said, hey, here's the entire continent of Japan, go out and conquer it with the mechanics of the game that they have, this would have been a nightmare. It would have been just horribly done. But they didn't do that, and so props off again for the game realizing that there are limitations, and they worked around that or within that. So as you can see, you start off depending on what campaign or character that you play as, and different missions may offer you multiple territories, 2, 3, or 1 at the start of a map. Now this can kind of tie in to difficulty, but you can claim territories rather fast in the beginning, and that's part of the whole point. The game manages around money management, military management, and just strategic management. The first thing you want to do is grab up a quick army, get some base defenses, and push out. Your first army is not going to conquer the world. They are just there to grab up as much land as they possibly can safely without you losing them. You don't want to lose them because that's money that you're losing. As you progress out, you want to upgrade these individual towns that you come across. Upgrading them, increasing the livestock ability, the tools, farming will give you an increased surplus of rice, which will go off a seasonal thing. As you can see in the bottom middle of the screen, it has a rice counter. That's sort of like the season rotation, and when the season is complete, you get an income of money. It's your resource management in any RTS. So in the very first beginning, depending on the map, some maps you don't want to push too far into enemy territory. You have to know which enemy and which direction you want to push into because you don't want to allow your flank to be vulnerable. So it's not a horrible idea just to go a small way, then border up and say we're not going to push north anymore, we're going to push south. We're going to head down to the south, try to gain more territory, maybe send out a few harassment armies to grab up a few territories of our enemies which are not guarded, because you can only have 4 armies. You have 4 armies and your command center. When you go to your command center, you can have a upgraded wall capability. Once you max this wall capability out, it will take out an entire army that attacks, but you need to replenish it. So taking a castle with a full stack of army is not exactly a walk in the park, and it will cost money, and it will be something you need to keep on, because your citadel, your home castle, shouldn't be something that you're afraid of losing or afraid of allowing the enemy to attack. If anything, you want to make sure you put one and use it as a border fortress, thus making one more position tactically that the enemy will have to fight through, and your farmlands and everything else that you can't really secure too well will be that much safer. The game is split up by harassment, where you charge into these different territories and try to not necessarily hold them, but stall them, make them have to backtrack their armies, make them have to try to fortify those locations with forces instead of pushing out against you, or just disrupting the seasonal intake. It's this little harassment game in the beginning, which you try to do to offset while building up resources of the towns and counties that you have conquered, eventually solidifying your position with powers and increasing the armies and money that you have for the stack of troops in your individual armies. When you move these armies, there is some confusion on exactly where they're going to go. I don't think the pathing system is 100%, because you can see that the forces of the directions of the paths that you can take, and I don't know if this is done to give the advantage to different opponents to be able to move through territories faster, but I found it more annoying than anything else, because you're not able to move your army into some clear, obvious decisions of, hey, I'm going to move 1 county over. Why do I have to go down 3 counties, over 1 county, up 4 counties to get to where I want to go? But it's not so detrimental or game-breaking that it's anything more than a slight annoyance. The real annoyance would probably be having to click on the micromanagement of replenishing your entire army. If there was a button in these army pop-up lists and you have the money and it just said replenish all, and you clicked on that, it would take your money and replenish every single troop you had, that would be so much easier and save me so much time and allow me to actually fight against my opponent. Because there are times when you're fighting on different fronts. And so if your north front gets attacked, and then your city gets attacked, and then your south front gets attacked, well, which one are you going to do first? And based on how slow the map movement is across the screen, you're not always able to assess. So not having a quick reactional capability by the system itself puts the player at more of a disadvantage when they really need to be, and that does take away from some of the fun. So as I talked earlier about the game really going hand in hand in what they have, there are some shortcomings. I would have liked to see, because you can only have 4 armies, maybe the option to build a border fortress. Maybe it doesn't have to be as strong as the city itself, and maybe you can only have 3 or 4 or 2 of them, but some sort of border fortress fortification where instead of having the same amount of wall structure defense as your citadel, maybe it only has half. Because you're limited in how many troops you have and they're If you're a good tactician, you can get around that no problem. But it's just this continuational feel of not really being able to solidify your gains or hold your ground. And after you already complete the farms and the increases in the structures, all it comes down to is just tactically moving your forces across the map and replenishing your forces. There's nothing else in the end game when it comes to base building or anything else. And that can kind of be excused because it's more of a simplistic game, but it is sort of at the same time a shortcoming or a disappointment because there's no increasing of your weapon damage, there's no increasing of your armor at a forge or anything like this. So at the end of the day, yes, the game is very simplistic and it may not be for everybody, but I found that it works out pretty well. The game never disrespected me or my time. If I was to lose, it was because I was not being as tactical, or I underestimated an opponent, or I spread myself too thin, rather than the game itself having some sort of unfair advantage. The advantages that the computer can have against you are simplistically advantages you can have against the computer if you just move fast enough to attack them. It goes back into what I said about the harassment. You want to harass the opponent and try to make them off guard so that you can have the advantage of a build up of military might and push in eventually to conquer their territory. And the difficulty that comes down to the game is just the speed or reactional speed that you have in handling with different situations. How fast can you click your army to get to another area? The difficulty is not giving an advantage in gear or numbers or troops or strength to the enemy because they play by the same rules, but rather a quickness in time. And really the discrepancy comes from that because the interface isn't so smooth to allow your quick reactional capabilities to match something as a computer, which doesn't have to worry about moving a slightly clunky interface. So really the only difficulty in this game is just moving your forces around the map because you're at a disadvantage due to the slow nature of clicking and moving your troops, especially when an attack alert or a siege alert comes up. Your castle gets attacked, it tells you, hey, these are the casualties, just like when your armies get attacked. But I found the game to be fairly balanced overall, so long as you hold your forces in a tactical manner. As you can see on that map, I've kept my forces, 2 armies, full stacks, in the top to hold off Blue's forces. I'm not progressing forward, I'm tactically held in that position so that they don't come down into my territory and I can focus more on Red and gain more land. So you compensate in a difficulty for what you don't have the quickness to do in tactical decisions. The hardest part of that is in the beginning on some maps because you're so scrunched up with everybody else. But the difficulty wasn't a detriment to the game. I'm not worried about the few performance issues I talked about earlier because the devs are on top of it. And overall, I enjoyed my time in this. The game sort of reminded me of a Total War Japan old style game, but in a much simplistic manner. And it was nice to see that because you don't really see that many offshoots or types. I think the biggest shortcoming of the game is the fact that they didn't have music propelling throughout the game while you play to really heighten the tensions throughout the experiences and to make a sense of thrilling and adventure and action and the consequence to every territory lost, being invaded, or your invasions, to really make it feel and solidify a badass complimentary. I enjoyed it. I actually did. So it's an easy recommend. I have been SocioPsycho. This has been Mob Reviews. I hope this has been helpful to you.